The flight of dreams. Marcus gazed out the bedroom window, his heart racing with excitement. Today was the day he'd been dreaming of. His first solo flight as an unaccompanied minor. As the son of a pilot, Marcus had been in the cockpit countless times, listening to his father's stories of cloud-wrapped skies and midnight landings. But this time was different. This time, he was flying alone. At 9 years old, this flight marked a rite of passage, something he'd treasure forever. He picked up his favorite model airplane, a miniature version of the very aircraft his father often flew. "You're coming with me," he whispered to it, carefully tucking it into his backpack. As he zipped it shut, he caught a glimpse of his junior pilot wings, pinned proudly on the strap, a gift from his dad. Those wings felt like magic, a small piece of his father's spirit, accompanying him on his journey. Downstairs, his father, Captain Jordan Hayes, was waiting in his crisp blue pilot uniform. "Ready to take on the skies, co-pilot?" his father asked, ruffling Marcus's hair. Marcus grinned. "Ready as I'll ever be." They arrived at the bustling airport, passing through security with ease. Every few steps, airport staff greeted Captain Hayes, exchanging nods and handshakes with Marcus's dad. With each greeting, Marcus's pride grew, and his nerves shrank. Being the son of a pilot felt like being part of a secret club, a family united by adventure and courage. "Remember, I'll be right up there in the sky with you," Captain Hayes said, pointing towards the gleaming runway. "Keep those wings pinned tight. They're a reminder that you belong up there too." When they reached the gate, Captain Hayes knelt beside Marcus. "I have to board my flight now, but you'll do just fine. Listen to the flight attendants, okay?" He placed a gentle hand on Marcus's shoulder, his eyes filled with pride and love. "I'll see you soon, buddy." Marcus nodded, holding back a surge of emotion. He didn't want to look like a baby in front of the other passengers. As his father headed towards his own gate, Marcus waved, his hand trembling with excitement. Inside the terminal, Marcus approached the check-in counter. A woman named Linda was stationed behind the desk, busy with boarding passes and ticketing tags. She looked up as he approached, her expression shifting to a polite but detached smile. "Yes, can I help you?" Marcus stood on his tiptoes, handing her his boarding pass. "Hi, I'm Marcus Hayes. I'm flying to Seattle to see my aunt." Linda scanned his boarding pass, her eyes flicking over the information with practiced efficiency. "Unaccompanied minor. I see. Well, let's get you set up." Her tone was neutral, and she didn't make much eye contact as she printed out the special tags for his bags. As Marcus waited, his fingers nervously touched the junior pilot wings pinned to his backpack strap. He wanted to tell Linda that his dad was a pilot, hoping it might make her smile or maybe even start a conversation. But before he could say anything, she handed him his tags and moved on to the next passenger, leaving Marcus to find his way alone to the gate. When he arrived, the boarding area was buzzing with travelers, some with children, others with briefcases and phones. Marcus found a seat by the window, staring at the airplanes as they taxied in and out of view. His heart thumped with excitement as he watched the planes soar, their powerful engines roaring through the air. Eventually, it was time to board, and Marcus joined the line of passengers. As he stepped up to the gate agent, his nerves returned. A tall, uniformed flight attendant named Claire was directing people to their seats. She looked at Marcus with a quick glance, her expression unreadable. "Ticket," she said, extending her hand. Marcus handed it over, looking up at her with a smile. He was used to people recognizing his dad's name, and he hoped it might spark a conversation. But Claire's face remained neutral as she scanned his ticket and handed it back. "Row 14, seat A," she said briskly, "and make sure to sit tight. The flight attendants will come by to help you if you need anything." Marcus nodded, clutching his backpack and heading down the aisle. He found his window seat and settled in, his fingers tapping nervously on the armrest. The roar of the engines filled the plane as the other passengers boarded, each of them looking at him with varying expressions. He noticed an older woman giving him a kind smile, and a young man across the aisle giving him a thumbs up. As the plane began to taxi, Marcus stared out the window, heart pounding with excitement. But just as he was starting to relax, Claire appeared at his row, her gaze fixed on him with a stern expression. "You're going to have to move," she said, her voice clipped. "We've assigned you to a different seat in the back of the plane. It's more appropriate for unaccompanied minors." Marcus looked up, confused. "But my dad picked this seat for me. I like sitting by the wing." Claire crossed her arms, looking unimpressed. "I'm afraid that's not an option, young man. You'll need to move to the back." Feeling a bit deflated, Marcus gathered his things, carefully tucking his model airplane back into his backpack. As he followed Claire down the aisle, he felt small and embarrassed, unsure why she was being so abrupt. She led him to a seat in the back, wedged between two large men who barely acknowledged him as he sat down. Marcus tried to focus on the flight, watching as the plane began its ascent. But his mind kept drifting back to Claire's cold demeanor and the other passengers' indifferent glances. He clutched his model plane in his hands, tracing the wings with his fingers, trying to recapture the excitement he'd felt just a few minutes ago. As the plane leveled out, a co-pilot named Sarah walked down the aisle, offering a warm smile to each passenger. When she reached Marcus, she paused, noticing the junior pilot wings on his bag. "Hey, those are some nice wings you've got there," she said kindly, crouching down to his level. "Do you have a special reason for wearing them?" Marcus felt a surge of pride. "My dad gave them to me. He's the captain on this flight." Sarah's eyes widened in surprise, her face softening with warmth. "Is that so? Well, it's an honor to meet the captain's son," she said, giving him a playful salute. Just then, Claire passed by, overhearing the conversation. She gave a disapproving look at Sarah, her voice sharp. "Sarah, we don't have time for special attention right now. We need to maintain order." Sarah glanced at Claire, her eyes narrowing slightly before she gave Marcus a comforting pat on the shoulder. "Don't worry, Marcus," she said softly. "We'll make sure you're comfortable." As Sarah walked away, Marcus felt a bit better. But Claire's dismissive tone still lingered in his mind, a shadow over what should have been the most exciting journey of his life. Marcus settled back into his seat, hugging his model plane close to his chest. Little did Claire know that the boy she'd brushed aside so easily was no ordinary passenger, and when Captain Hayes learned of his son's treatment, the flight would take a turn no one could have predicted. Unseen clouds. The hum of the plane settled into a low, steady drone as the seatbelt sign clicked off. Marcus glanced around, observing how other passengers relaxed into their seats, stretching out or digging into snacks they'd brought along. He tried to focus on the excitement of flying alone, but Claire's icy tone and the cramped seat in the back of the plane made him feel small and uncomfortable. Reaching into his backpack, he carefully took out his prized model airplane, a small, perfectly crafted replica of the Boeing his dad flew. He loved how detailed it was, from the tiny engines to the miniature windows lining its sides. Holding the plane close to his chest, he felt a little less alone. Marcus remembered how his dad had explained everything about planes, from the tiniest nuts and bolts to the roar of the engines on takeoff. His father's words came to mind. "Every part of the plane has a purpose, and every person on it has a story." It was a lesson in respect and curiosity, two things his father always valued. As he held his model plane, he noticed the man seated beside him glance over, intrigued. "That's a pretty cool model you've got there, kid," the man said, a hint of warmth in his voice. He was wearing a leather jacket, his salt and pepper hair framing a friendly, lined face. "You into planes?" Marcus's face lit up. "Yeah, my dad's a pilot, and he gave me this one. It's exactly like the plane he flies." The man's eyebrows raised, and he gave Marcus an approving nod. "Is that so? Looks like you're set to follow in his footsteps, then." "I hope so," Marcus replied, his voice proud. "One day, I want to be just like him." The man chuckled. Well, kid, if you keep that dream close, you'll get there. I'll be looking out for you in the skies one day. As they chatted, Marcus felt his spirits lift. The man's friendly words and interest in his story reminded him of his dad's encouragement. Maybe not everyone here was like Claire. Just as he was feeling more at ease, though, Claire came down the aisle, her face set in a hard line. "We're coming around with the snack service," she announced, her voice devoid of warmth. "If you need anything, raise your hand now." Marcus raised his hand, hoping to get apple juice. He knew it might seem small, but his dad always got him apple juice whenever they flew together. It was their little ritual, something that made each flight feel special. When Claire finally reached him, her expression was less than pleased. "Yes," she asked curtly, barely glancing down. "Could I have apple juice, please?" Marcus asked, his voice polite. Claire sighed, reaching into her cart and pulling out a juice box without looking at him. She handed it to him in a quick, dismissive motion, then turned to the next passenger without a word. Marcus glanced at the juice box, feeling the embarrassment rise in his chest. Other passengers nearby seemed to notice the exchange, some looking over with confused expressions. Marcus took a sip of his juice, trying to shake off the uncomfortable feeling. He focused on the airplane model, tracing the wings and the small cockpit with his finger, imagining himself up there, like his dad. The thought brought him a small measure of comfort, but the sting of Claire's cold attitude lingered. As the plane leveled out, the man beside him leaned over again. "Don't let her bother you, kid. Some folks just don't know how to treat others right." Marcus nodded quietly, appreciating the man's reassurance. The flight attendant's attitude had surprised him, especially since his dad had always told him that airline staff were like family. He couldn't help but feel that something about the situation wasn't right. Just then, the intercom crackled, and Captain Jordan Hayes's voice came over the speakers. His deep, calming tone filled the cabin. "Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. This is your captain speaking. We're cruising at an altitude of 35,000 feet, and we should have smooth skies ahead. For those flying solo today, I want to extend a special welcome. If you're ever looking up at the sky and dreaming about flying, just know, those dreams are closer than you think." Hearing his dad's voice made Marcus's heart soar. He sat a little taller in his seat, pride swelling in his chest. His dad always knew what to say, always had a way of making him feel understood and important. As the announcement ended, Marcus held his model plane tighter, picturing himself sitting beside his dad in the cockpit, guiding the plane through clouds and over cities far below. Nearby, some passengers exchanged comments, nodding at the reassuring message. Marcus noticed that the older woman from earlier was smiling in his direction, her gaze kind and understanding. But Claire, who was passing by, rolled her eyes and muttered something under her breath. The man next to Marcus noticed too and gave her a sharp look. "Excuse me," he said, his voice calm but firm. "That announcement was for everyone, you know." Claire looked taken aback, pausing before she replied. "I'm just trying to make sure everything runs smoothly," she said, her tone defensive. "By making a young passenger feel unwelcome," the man countered, his voice still steady. "Might want to check your priorities." A few nearby passengers looked over, some nodding in agreement. Claire's face flushed slightly as she hurried off, her heels clicking down the aisle. Marcus watched her go, a strange mixture of relief and discomfort settling in. He was grateful for the man's defense, but he still couldn't shake the feeling of unease. After a few minutes, Marcus decided to pull out his sketchbook. He loved drawing planes almost as much as he loved flying them, and his sketchbook was filled with careful renditions of various aircraft, each one labeled and dated. He flipped to a new page and began sketching, his pencil moving over the paper with ease. As he was deep into his drawing, Sarah, the co-pilot from earlier, walked by. She noticed his sketchbook and stopped, a warm smile spreading across her face. "That's some impressive artwork you've got there," she said, bending down to get a better look. "Are you drawing the plane we're on?" Marcus nodded, his cheeks turning pink. "Yes, Mom. I want to get every detail right." Sarah chuckled, clearly impressed. "Well, it looks like you're well on your way to being a pilot yourself." Before Marcus could reply, Claire returned, her face set in a disapproving frown as she looked down at Sarah and Marcus. "Sarah, we're busy. We can't be stopping for casual conversations." Sarah's smile faded as she glanced up, her gaze hardening slightly. "Just taking a moment to appreciate one of our young aviation enthusiasts," she replied calmly. Claire's eyes narrowed, and without another word, she turned on her heel and stalked away. Sarah gave Marcus a reassuring wink before heading back to the front, but the interaction left him feeling unsettled. He wondered why Claire seemed so determined to make him feel out of place. As the flight continued, Marcus focused on his sketchbook, trying to block out the uncomfortable moments. He sketched the plane's wings, adding every little detail, from the flaps to the landing gear. Drawing was his way of feeling connected to his father and to the skies. Each line on the page was like a step closer to his dream. Meanwhile, up in the cockpit, Captain Jordan Hayes was going over the flight controls with his co-pilot. But something was nagging at the back of his mind. Before the flight, he'd asked the staff to keep an eye on Marcus, to make sure he was comfortable and safe. Yet, somehow, he felt a strange twinge of worry. During a quick break, he asked Sarah, "How's Marcus doing? I haven't had a chance to check on him." Sarah hesitated, glancing at the controls. "He's a great kid, really. A lot like you. Smart, polite, and loves planes. But, well, there's been a bit of tension with one of the flight attendants." Captain Hayes's jaw tightened. Tension. What kind of tension? Sarah chose her words carefully. "I don't think it's anything intentional, but Claire's been a bit brusque with him. I'm not sure she knows who he is." Captain Hayes frowned, his fatherly instincts flaring. He'd always known the airline world could be rough, but he hadn't expected his son to feel unwelcome on his own flight. He made a mental note to check on Marcus as soon as they landed. He wanted to ensure his son was safe and happy, and if anyone was treating him unfairly, they'd have to answer for it. Back in his seat, Marcus finally finished his sketch, feeling a sense of accomplishment as he looked at the finished drawing. He'd captured every detail, from the sleek nose to the perfectly angled wings. It was just like his dad had taught him: patience, precision, and passion. The plane began its descent, the familiar pressure building in Marcus's ears as they lowered toward the runway. He clutched his model plane tightly, anticipation growing as they neared the ground. He couldn't wait to see his dad again, to tell him about everything, both the good and the bad. As the plane touched down, and the wheels screeched against the runway, Marcus felt a surge of relief and excitement. This flight hadn't been exactly what he'd expected, but he was ready to face whatever came next. Little did he know, however, that his father had already sensed the tension on board and was prepared to take action. As the passengers prepared to disembark, Marcus stayed in his seat, waiting patiently. He clutched his junior pilot wings, feeling the weight of his experience settle over him. This wasn't just a flight. It had been a journey of resilience and self-worth, and he was ready to stand up for himself. Captain Hayes's voice crackled over the intercom, welcoming passengers to their destination. But this time, the message wasn't just for the travelers. It was a quiet promise to his son that he'd never have to face unfair treatment alone. Discovering wings. As the plane taxied to the gate, Marcus watched out the small window, feeling a mix of excitement and relief that the journey was almost over. The experience on this flight had been far from what he had imagined. He had started the day with a heart full of pride and excitement, eager for the adventure of his first solo flight. But now he felt a confusing weight pressing on him, a mixture of disappointment, confusion, and a sense of injustice he couldn't quite put into words. The passengers around him stood up as the plane came to a stop, pulling their bags from the overhead bins and stretching after the long flight. Marcus stayed in his seat, watching as the bustling line of people moved past him, eager to exit. He was waiting for a flight attendant to escort him, as his dad had instructed. That was supposed to be Claire's job, but the thought of dealing with her again made him anxious. Just as he was thinking this, the man who had sat beside him, the one who had shown interest in his drawings, leaned over with a gentle smile. "Well, young pilot, it was a pleasure to meet you. Keep working on those sketches, all right. And remember, those wings on your backpack. You've earned them." Marcus felt a warmth spread through him, grateful for the man's kindness. "Thank you, sir," he replied with a small, proud smile. As the man walked down the aisle, Sarah, the co-pilot, came back into the cabin. She made her way to Marcus, her face lit with a warm smile, as she knelt down to his eye level. "Hey, buddy," she said gently, her eyes kind and understanding. "Ready to head out?" Marcus nodded, his fingers clutching his model plane tightly. "Thank you, Miss Sarah," he said, his voice quiet but sincere. Sarah stood, gesturing for him to follow her. As they made their way toward the front of the plane, Claire was by the galley, organizing her belongings with an air of efficiency. She barely looked up as Sarah and Marcus passed, but Sarah caught Claire's eye and gave her a subtle, pointed look. It was clear there would be a conversation later, one that Claire wouldn't find easy to brush off. As they reached the jet bridge, Sarah leaned down and ruffled Marcus's hair lightly. "Your dad's probably waiting just outside. He's very proud of you, you know." Marcus's heart swelled with pride, and he gave Sarah a shy smile. "Thanks. I can't wait to see him." The two stepped into the bustling terminal, and Marcus's eyes immediately scanned the crowd for his father. Then he saw him, a tall figure in his pilot's uniform, his face breaking into a broad smile the moment he spotted Marcus. Captain Jordan Hayes strode forward, his long strides quickly closing the distance between them. "Dad!" Marcus exclaimed, unable to hold back his excitement. He ran forward, throwing his arms around his father's waist. The familiar scent of his father's cologne, mixed with the faint smell of the airplane cabin, felt like home. Captain Hayes hugged him tightly, then held him at arm's length, looking him over with a proud fatherly gaze. "There's my co-pilot. How was the flight, kiddo?" Marcus hesitated, his earlier excitement giving way to a sudden feeling of uncertainty. He didn't want to complain or seem ungrateful, but the things he had experienced on the flight weighed heavily on him. "It was okay," Marcus said, choosing his words carefully. "I met some nice people, but some things didn't go like I thought they would." Captain Hayes's face grew serious, his brow furrowing as he listened intently. "What do you mean, buddy? Did something happen?" Just then, Sarah stepped forward, her face reflecting the concern in Captain Hayes's expression. "Captain Hayes, there were some incidents on the flight that I think you'd want to know about," she said softly. "Your son handled everything very well, but I'd like to explain what happened if you have a moment." Captain Hayes's jaw tightened, but he nodded calmly. "Of course. Let's find a quiet spot to sit down." They moved to a nearby seating area, where Captain Hayes and Marcus took seats side by side, while Sarah stood nearby, recounting the series of events in a calm, steady voice. She spoke of Claire's dismissive attitude toward Marcus, her refusal to let him sit in his assigned seat, and the way she had made him feel unwelcome. As Sarah described each interaction, Marcus noticed his father's expression harden, his usually kind eyes growing cold and serious. Marcus listened, feeling a mix of relief and anxiety. He didn't want to get anyone in trouble, but he couldn't deny the hurt and confusion he had felt. His father's silence weighed heavily on him, but he knew his dad well enough to recognize that he was simply holding back his emotions, taking in every detail before reacting. When Sarah finished, Captain Hayes took a deep breath, his gaze shifting to Marcus. "Son," he said, his voice steady but full of emotion, "I'm so sorry you had to go through that. That's not how you deserve to be treated, not by anyone, especially not by people in this industry." Marcus nodded, a sense of validation settling over him. I didn't expect it, Dad. I thought being on a plane would always feel like home, you know. Like when we fly together." Captain Hayes's face softened, and he placed a reassuring hand on Marcus's shoulder. "It should feel like that, buddy, and I'm going to make sure it does from now on." He turned to Sarah, gratitude in his gaze. "Thank you for looking out for him. I can't tell you how much that means to me." Sarah smiled, nodding. "He's a wonderful kid, Captain, just like his father." At that moment, Claire appeared at the edge of the seating area, her expression caught between irritation and embarrassment as she spotted the small group. Captain Hayes noticed her and rose to his feet, his tall figure towering over her as she hesitantly approached. "Miss Claire," he began, his tone calm but edged with steel, "I believe we need to have a conversation." Claire's cheeks flushed slightly as she forced a polite smile, her usual confidence faltering under the captain's piercing gaze. "Captain Hayes, I assure you, I was only following standard procedure," she said quickly. "I have to prioritize the safety and comfort of all passengers." Captain Hayes didn't break eye contact, his face unreadable. "I understand the importance of procedure, Miss Claire, but there's also a matter of respect. Treating passengers, especially young ones, with kindness and dignity is part of our job. My son was excited to experience this flight, something he's dreamed of for a long time. And instead, he felt unwelcome and ignored." Claire's expression shifted, the frustration giving way to a trace of guilt. I didn't realize he was your son, Captain Hayes. If I had known, I would have." Captain Hayes held up a hand, cutting her off. "It shouldn't matter who he is. Every passenger, regardless of who their family is, deserves the same level of respect. My son shouldn't have to rely on his father's title to be treated kindly." Claire's gaze dropped, her face pale. She seemed to struggle for words, but Captain Hayes continued before she could respond. "I hope this experience serves as a reminder that respect and empathy are essential, especially in our line of work." After a tense silence, Claire nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. "Yes, Captain. I understand." Captain Hayes held her gaze for a moment longer before dismissing her with a brief nod. Claire quickly turned and walked away, her usual brisk stride lacking its former confidence. Marcus watched her go, feeling a mix of relief and sympathy. Despite her treatment of him, he couldn't help but hope she would learn from the experience. When Claire had disappeared around the corner, Captain Hayes knelt beside Marcus, his expression gentle once again. "I'm so proud of you, son," he said, his voice filled with warmth. "You handled yourself with dignity and respect, even when others didn't show you the same." Marcus looked up at his dad, a shy smile tugging at his lips. I try to remember what you always tell me, that every person has their own story, and every plane has a purpose." Captain Hayes chuckled, pulling him into a hug. "That's right. And you, my little co-pilot, have an incredible story ahead of you." Sarah, who had been quietly observing, spoke up with a smile. "Captain, if you don't mind, I'd like to show Marcus the cockpit before you two leave. A private tour for the captain's son, if he's interested." Marcus's eyes widened in excitement, and he looked at his father for permission. Captain Hayes grinned, giving him a nod. "I think that's a fantastic idea." They made their way to the plane, Sarah leading the way. The flight attendants cleaning up after the flight shot curious glances their way, but Captain Hayes's firm presence kept any questions at bay. When they reached the cockpit, Marcus's eyes widened in awe as he took in the array of buttons, levers, and screens. Sarah pointed to various controls, explaining their functions in a way that was both simple and fascinating. Captain Hayes joined in, pointing out the yoke, the throttle, and other key instruments. Marcus listened intently, his heart swelling with pride and joy. Being here, in the cockpit with his father, was a dream come true. After a few minutes, Sarah stepped aside, giving Captain Hayes and Marcus a moment alone. Captain Hayes knelt beside his son, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. "Marcus, remember this moment. Flying is about more than just reaching a destination. It's about courage, respect, and passion for the journey. You showed all of those things today." Marcus looked up at him, his eyes shining. "I understand, Dad. And I want to be like you. Not just a pilot, but someone people can count on." Captain Hayes smiled, his pride in his son radiating from him. "You already are, buddy." As they left the cockpit and exited the plane, Marcus felt lighter than he had all day. The journey had been tough, but he'd learned more than he ever expected. He knew there would be more challenges ahead, but with his father's guidance and the memory of this experience, he was ready for whatever came next. He was ready to chase his dreams, and he knew that nothing and no one could hold him back. Strength in the skies. As the days passed after the flight, Marcus couldn't stop thinking about the experience. He had learned so much, not just about planes but about people and respect. But what stayed with him most was his dad's unwavering support and how he had handled Claire's behavior with calm authority. The weekend after the flight, Marcus was back at the airport with his father. Captain Hayes was on standby for a last-minute flight, and Marcus, thrilled to join him for the day, walked with his dad through the terminal. Every familiar sight, the endless windows facing the runway, the flight boards flashing destinations, and the polished floors reflecting passengers' hurried strides, filled Marcus with excitement and pride. Captain Hayes took Marcus to the lounge where pilots waited before flights, giving him a glimpse of the professional world he admired so much. Pilots in their crisp uniforms sat together, some reading weather reports, others discussing flight paths, all moving with a calm confidence that Marcus found inspiring. As Marcus explored the lounge, he overheard a young pilot discussing her recent flight experience with another crew member. "Passengers were nervous because of the turbulence," she said, her tone soft but proud. "I reassured them. It was my first time taking the lead like that, and it felt good to make people feel safe." The words resonated with Marcus. He thought about how his father had reassured him after the flight with Claire. It wasn't just the flying itself that made a great pilot. It was about being there for others, making people feel safe. A feeling of determination sparked in his heart. He wanted to be that kind of person, not only in the skies, but wherever he went. After a few hours, Captain Hayes received his flight assignment. It was a short domestic flight, just a 2-hour trip, and since Marcus was allowed to join him on workdays, he was excited to spend more time observing his father in action. The familiar routine began. Marcus waited at the crew desk, watching as his father went through pre-flight checks and spoke with the co-pilot and crew. Seeing his father in uniform, focused and confident, filled him with admiration. As they boarded the plane, Marcus noticed the flight attendants and the rest of the staff in the galley preparing for the upcoming flight. This time, they recognized him immediately, especially after hearing he was Captain Hayes' son, and greeted him warmly. The flight attendants gave him friendly smiles, and one even offered him a complimentary bag of pretzels, much to Marcus's delight. When they reached the cockpit, Marcus's heart pounded with excitement. His father had arranged for him to sit in the jump seat, a small folding seat just behind the pilot and co-pilot. He fastened the seatbelt, his feet barely touching the floor, as he looked around the cockpit, absorbing every detail. Captain Hayes and his co-pilot, a young man named Lewis, began running through the pre-flight checklist, their hands moving over switches and buttons with practiced ease. Lewis glanced back at Marcus, smiling warmly. "Marcus, you're one lucky guy to have a pilot for a dad. Ready for some Aviation 101? Lewis asked, giving Marcus a playful wink. Marcus grinned, nodding enthusiastically. "Absolutely." As the engines roared to life, Marcus watched in awe, feeling the rumble beneath his feet as the plane slowly taxied to the runway. He could barely contain his excitement. To him, this wasn't just a routine takeoff. It was the start of a journey that he hoped would one day lead him to his own pilot's seat. The plane took off smoothly, climbing through layers of clouds as the ground disappeared from view. Marcus felt a familiar rush as he watched the sky open up around them, the city below shrinking until it was just a patchwork of colors and shapes. As they reached cruising altitude, Captain Hayes glanced back at Marcus with a smile. How's the view from up here, co-pilot? Marcus's face lit up. It's amazing, Dad. I can see why you love this so much. Captain Hayes nodded. It's a beautiful thing, son. But remember, it's also a responsibility. Every time I fly, I'm responsible for every person on board. Being a pilot isn't just about flying. It's about looking after others, even if they're strangers. Marcus absorbed his father's words, his admiration for him growing deeper. He remembered Claire's cold treatment and how it had made him feel. He understood now, more than ever, the importance of treating people with kindness and respect. The flight continued smoothly, and Lewis took a moment to explain some of the instruments on the panel, showing Marcus how the altimeter, compass, and speed indicators worked. Marcus listened intently, his eyes shining with fascination. But just as he was getting comfortable, a soft ping sounded in the cockpit, a minor alert on the display screen. Lewis looked at it briefly, his expression calm but focused. "Captain, looks like we got some weather up ahead." "Nothing major, just a bit of turbulence," he said, adjusting the controls slightly. Captain Hayes nodded, his face serene. He picked up the intercom, speaking in a calm, steady voice to the passengers. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We're expecting a bit of mild turbulence in the next few minutes. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened, and we'll do our best to keep this as smooth as possible. Thank you for your patience." Marcus watched in awe as his father reassured the passengers with such calm confidence. Even though he knew it was just a routine announcement, he admired how his father's voice could put people at ease, even in moments of uncertainty. As they flew into the turbulence, the plane began to shake gently. Marcus gripped the armrests of his seat, feeling a flutter of nervousness in his stomach. But he kept his eyes on his father, who remained calm and focused, his hand steady on the controls. Lewis noticed Marcus's expression and turned around, giving him an encouraging smile. "It's just like a bumpy road, Marcus. Nothing we can't handle. Your dad here has been through way worse." Captain Hayes chuckled, nodding. "That's right. Turbulence is just air moving in different directions. Think of it like waves in the ocean." Marcus relaxed, his grip loosening on the armrests. The plane soon steadied, and the turbulence passed. He felt a swell of pride for his dad, seeing firsthand how he managed challenges with grace and calm. After the turbulence, Captain Hayes engaged the autopilot and turned to Marcus. "Want to know a secret, son?" Marcus nodded, leaning forward eagerly. "Yes, please." Captain Hayes smiled, his eyes thoughtful. "No matter how many times I've done this, I still get a little nervous before every flight. It's not about fear, it's about respect. Respect for the skies, for the passengers, and for the responsibility I carry. Being a pilot isn't just about skill, it's about heart." Marcus felt a lump in his throat, hearing his father's words. He realized that being a pilot wasn't just a job for his dad. It was a calling, a commitment. It was about putting others first, even in the face of uncertainty. Just then, there was a knock on the cockpit door, and Sarah, the co-pilot from the previous flight, peeked in. She smiled warmly when she saw Marcus, her eyes twinkling. "Well, if it isn't my favorite junior aviator," she said with a grin. "I heard you were getting a special cockpit tour today." Marcus beamed at her, feeling the surge of happiness. "Hi, Miss Sarah. I'm learning so much." Sarah looked at Captain Hayes, her face softening with respect. "You've got yourself a great mentor here, Marcus. Your dad is one of the best." Captain Hayes chuckled, waving a hand modestly. "Only because I've got a great co-pilot beside me." He nodded toward Marcus, his pride evident. Sarah stayed for a few minutes, sharing stories from her own experiences as a co-pilot and recounting funny moments she'd had with passengers. Marcus hung on her every word, fascinated by the world of aviation that he loved so much. When the plane began its descent, Marcus felt a twinge of sadness, wishing the flight could last forever. But he knew this wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. He had a lifetime of flights ahead, with his dad guiding him every step of the way. As they touched down, Marcus felt a surge of joy, knowing that he had experienced something truly special. The flight had been more than just a ride. It had been a lesson in courage, respect, and responsibility. As they taxied to the gate, Marcus glanced out the window, his heart full of gratitude and dreams. When they deboarded, Captain Hayes gave Marcus a reassuring pat on the shoulder. "How did it feel to be part of the crew, son?" Marcus's face broke into a proud smile. "It was the best day ever, Dad. I want to be just like you." Captain Hayes hugged him tightly, his voice thick with emotion. "You already are, buddy. You already are." As they walked through the terminal, a few passengers who had been on the flight approached, recognizing Captain Hayes and Marcus. One elderly woman smiled at Marcus, her eyes kind. "Are you Captain Hayes' son?" Marcus nodded, a bit shy but proud. "Yes, Mom." The woman's face softened, and she reached out to pat his shoulder gently. "You must be so proud. Your father is a wonderful man." Marcus's heart swelled, and he nodded, glancing up at his dad with admiration. "I am very proud." Captain Hayes wrapped an arm around his son's shoulders as they walked toward the parking lot, the afternoon sun casting long shadows across the tarmac. Marcus felt a warmth settle over him, knowing that he was on the right path. He might be young, but he was already learning what it meant to carry wings, not just on his uniform, but in his heart. And one day, he'd carry them into the skies, just like his dad. The journey beyond the clouds. Over the next few weeks, Marcus couldn't stop talking about his experience in the cockpit with his dad and the co-pilot, Lewis. The sense of pride, excitement, and belonging he felt on that flight stayed with him, fueling his passion for aviation even more. He began spending his weekends building new model planes, meticulously painting each one to match the real aircraft he'd seen in pictures or on his dad's flights. Captain Hayes noticed his son's growing dedication and decided it was time to introduce Marcus to someone special, an old friend and retired pilot named Charlie Brooks. Charlie had been a mentor to Captain Hayes when he was just starting out, teaching him not only about flying but about the importance of humility and resilience. Charlie, a tall man with a gentle voice and a smile that could light up a room, had spent most of his life in the skies, and now shared his stories and wisdom with young aviation enthusiasts. One sunny Saturday morning, Captain Hayes drove Marcus to a small airport outside the city. It was quiet and calm, a stark contrast to the bustling commercial airport Marcus was used to. As they pulled into the parking lot, Marcus spotted an old silver Cessna parked near a hangar, its gleaming wings catching the morning light. "Who's that for, Dad?" Marcus asked, his eyes wide with curiosity as he climbed out of the car. Captain Hayes smiled. "That, my boy, belongs to an old friend of mine who's waiting to meet you." Inside the hangar, Charlie was adjusting the propeller of the Cessna, his movements careful and practiced. When he looked up and saw Captain Hayes and Marcus approaching, his face broke into a welcoming grin. "Jordan, good to see you, my friend," he called, his voice rich with warmth. He extended a hand to Marcus, who shook it eagerly. "This must be Marcus, the little co-pilot I've heard so much about," Charlie said, his eyes twinkling. "Your dad tells me you've got some serious dreams about flying." Marcus's cheeks flushed with pride. "Yes, sir. I want to be just like my dad. Maybe even fly my own plane someday." Charlie chuckled, glancing at Captain Hayes. "He's got your spirit, Jordan. And judging by the look in his eyes, he's got your determination too." Captain Hayes nodded, his gaze filled with pride. "That he does. I thought you might like to show him a bit of what it's like out here, Charlie. Give him a taste of what it's like to fly beyond the busy commercial flights." Charlie nodded, gesturing toward the Cessna. "Well, Marcus, how would you like to help me do a pre-flight check on this beauty?" Marcus's eyes lit up as he eagerly followed Charlie to the small plane. He watched intently as Charlie showed him how to check the fuel, inspect the propeller, and test the flaps. Unlike the bustling commercial planes Marcus was used to, The Cessna felt personal and intimate, as if it held stories in every rivet and seam. "This plane has been with me for years," Charlie said, patting the side affectionately. "I've flown through mountain valleys, over rivers, and across open fields with her. And every time I take off, it feels like the first time." Marcus looked up at him, wide-eyed. "Do you ever get scared?" Charlie smiled, nodding thoughtfully. "Sometimes, but it's not the kind of fear that makes you want to run away. It's a feeling that reminds you to respect the skies, to never take them for granted. Just like any good relationship, you treat it with care, and it'll reward you in ways you can't imagine." As they finished the pre-flight check, Charlie looked at Marcus with a twinkle in his eye. "How would you feel about coming up with me, Marcus? We can take a short ride over the fields, just to give you a feel for what it's like to be in a smaller plane." Marcus's heart raced. He glanced at his dad, who gave him an encouraging nod. "Go on, son. You're in good hands." With a huge grin, Marcus climbed into the small cockpit, buckling his seatbelt as Charlie settled in beside him. The plane felt different from the big commercial jets he'd flown in before. Everything was closer, more direct, and the seat felt snug around him. Charlie explained each control, his voice calm and reassuring, making Marcus feel at ease. As they taxied down the small runway, Marcus felt a sense of wonder wash over him. The plane gathered speed, and soon they were lifting off, the ground falling away below them. Unlike the commercial planes where he could barely feel the takeoff, this one was exhilarating. He could feel every vibration, every change in altitude, as if he were part of the plane itself. The Cessna climbed through the air, and Marcus was struck by the beauty of the landscape below. Fields, rivers, and clusters of trees stretched out like a green and gold quilt, and in the distance he could see the city skyline. The world looked so different from up here, small and peaceful, as if all the worries on the ground had faded away. As they reached a cruising altitude, Charlie turned to Marcus, his voice warm. "How's it feel up here, Marcus?" Marcus could barely contain his excitement. "It feels free," he said, the word escaping him before he could even think. Charlie chuckled. "That's exactly it, son. When you're up here, the world opens up, and you start to understand that there's more to life than what you see on the ground. It's about perspective." They flew in silence for a while, Marcus absorbing every detail, every sensation. He loved how close he felt to the controls, to the roar of the engine, and to the endless sky stretching out before him. After about 30 minutes, they began their descent back to the airport. Marcus watched as the ground rose to meet them, feeling a bittersweet pang as they touched down. He didn't want the flight to end, but he knew he'd be back up here someday soon. As they climbed out of the plane, Charlie placed a hand on Marcus's shoulder. "You did well up there, young man. You've got a steady heart for this. Remember, flying isn't just about skill. It's about heart and respect, for the sky and for the people you'll meet along the way." Marcus nodded, soaking in every word. "Thank you, Mr. Brooks. I'll never forget it." Captain Hayes joined them, smiling as he ruffled Marcus's hair. "Looks like you've had quite an experience. I think we've got a future pilot in the family." Charlie gave Captain Hayes a knowing nod. "He's got the spirit, that's for sure. And Jordan, he's lucky to have you to guide him." Later that evening, back at home, Marcus sat in his room with his sketchbook, the day's experience still vivid in his mind. He opened to a blank page and began to draw the Cessna, carefully sketching each detail as he remembered it. His fingers moved steadily over the paper, capturing the shape of the wings, the gentle slope of the propeller, and the way the sunlight had glinted off the silver metal. As he sketched, Marcus thought about Charlie's words, about respecting the sky and the people he'd meet along the way. He knew he still had a long journey ahead, but he felt more certain than ever that he was on the right path. The next morning, Marcus woke up early, feeling a renewed sense of purpose. He joined his dad in the kitchen, where Captain Hayes was reading the morning news, a cup of coffee in hand. Marcus sat down across from him, his eyes bright. "Dad," he began, his voice full of excitement, "I want to do something to help other kids learn about planes. Like maybe I could start a club at school, or we could visit airports and learn from real pilots. I want to share what you and Mr. Brooks taught me." Captain Hayes looked at his son, his heart swelling with pride. "That's a wonderful idea, Marcus. Sharing what you love with others is one of the best things you can do. And I'll help you however I can." Over the following weeks, Marcus threw himself into his new project. With his dad's help, he created a flyer for an aviation club at school, inviting anyone interested in learning about planes, flight, and aviation history to join. He was nervous at first, worried that no one would show up, but on the first day, he was surprised to see a small group of kids waiting for him in the classroom his teacher had set aside for their meetings. One of the kids, a shy girl named Leela, approached Marcus with a question. "Is it true that your dad is a pilot?" Marcus nodded proudly. "Yeah. He even took me to the cockpit on one of his flights, and I got to see how everything works. It was amazing." As the weeks went by, the club grew, and so did Marcus's confidence. He led discussions about different types of aircraft, shared his sketches, and even invited his dad as a guest speaker one day. Captain Hayes brought in photos, model planes, and shared stories from his years in the sky. The kids listened in awe, their faces lighting up with excitement. Marcus felt a deep sense of fulfillment as he watched his friends' enthusiasm grow. He realized that sharing his passion with others was just as rewarding as flying itself, and each time he spoke about the sky, he felt closer to his dream. One evening, as he sat with his dad on the back porch, watching the stars twinkle in the darkening sky, Captain Hayes placed an arm around him. "You know, Marcus," he said quietly, "the sky is big enough for all our dreams. Keep working hard, stay curious, and don't forget to lift others up along the way." Marcus nodded, feeling the truth of his father's words settle in his heart. He didn't know exactly what the future held, but he knew he was ready to face it, with respect, determination, and a heart as open as the sky above him. Flying toward the future. A few months later, Marcus's aviation club was thriving. What had started as a small group of curious classmates had grown into a dedicated community of young aviation enthusiasts, meeting weekly to talk about everything from early flight pioneers to modern aircraft technology. The school principal even allowed Marcus to organize a special Aviation Day event where students could display their model planes, drawings, and projects, transforming the gymnasium into a miniature aviation museum. Captain Hayes, proud and supportive, helped Marcus prepare for the event. He reached out to his connections in the airline industry, managing to secure a few guest speakers for the day. An air traffic controller, a flight engineer, and even a retired test pilot were scheduled to give presentations, bringing real-world aviation experience to the kids. The night before Aviation Day, Marcus sat in his room, surrounded by models and posters he planned to display. He wanted everything to be perfect, not for himself, but for the students he had inspired. He had learned from his dad that flying wasn't just about getting from one place to another. It was about bringing people together, lifting others up, and sharing the wonder of the skies. This event was his way of doing just that. "Are you ready for tomorrow, co-pilot?" Captain Hayes asked, peeking into Marcus's room with a smile. Marcus looked up, beaming. "I think so, Dad. I'm a little nervous, though. I just want everyone to have a good time." Captain Hayes sat on the edge of Marcus's bed, placing a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "Remember, son, you've already done something amazing by organizing this event. No matter how it goes, you've created a space for people to learn and dream together. That's something to be proud of." Marcus nodded, taking a deep breath. His dad's words reassured him, and he felt a sense of calm settle over him. They stayed up a little longer, going over the schedule one last time, and making sure every detail was in place. The next morning, Marcus arrived at the gym early, his heart pounding with excitement. Banners decorated the walls, and tables lined the room, each one carefully arranged with aviation displays and model planes. As students and teachers began arriving, Marcus felt a thrill of joy watching their faces light up as they looked around. By mid-morning, the gym was buzzing with energy. Kids pointed at the models, parents chatted with each other, and teachers marveled at the students' projects. Leila, the shy girl who had joined the club on the first day, had set up a display of her favorite historical planes, complete with detailed drawings and little fact cards she'd written herself. "You did a great job, Leila," Marcus said, giving her an encouraging smile. "I didn't know you were so good at drawing." Leila blushed, smiling shyly. "Thanks, Marcus. I really like learning about old planes. They're so different from the ones we have now." Before long, the guest speakers began their presentations. The air traffic controller shared stories about guiding planes safely through busy skies, showing radar images and describing the importance of communication in the cockpit. The flight engineer explained the inner workings of airplane engines, using diagrams and models that captivated the students. But the highlight of the day came when the retired test pilot, Mr. Jennings, stepped forward. He was an older man with silver hair and a booming voice that filled the gym. He wore a worn leather jacket and aviator sunglasses, looking every bit the part of a seasoned pilot. When he spoke, the room fell silent. "Let me tell you something about flying," Mr. Jennings began, his voice strong and full of conviction. "Flying isn't just a job. It's a way of life. It's about pushing past your fears, challenging yourself, and seeing the world from a perspective most people only dream of." The students listened intently as Mr. Jennings shared stories from his career, testing new planes, encountering unexpected turbulence, and navigating storms. He described moments of fear and exhilaration, and how each flight taught him something new about himself and the world. "There were times I was scared," he admitted, his eyes scanning the crowd. "But I learned that courage isn't about never being afraid. It's about feeling that fear and taking flight anyway." Marcus felt his chest swell with pride as he listened. Mr. Jennings's words reminded him of his own journey, of the challenges he had faced with Claire and the lessons he had learned from his father. He realized that his passion for flying wasn't just about the planes or the technology. It was about the resilience and determination that flying demanded. After Mr. Jennings finished speaking, the audience erupted into applause. Marcus couldn't contain his excitement as he approached the test pilot after the talk. "Mr. Jennings, that was incredible. Thank you so much for coming," Marcus said, his eyes shining with admiration. Mr. Jennings looked down at him, smiling warmly. "Thank you, young man. I hear you've got some big dreams of your own." Marcus nodded, his voice filled with conviction. "I want to be a pilot just like you and my dad, and I want to help other people understand how amazing flying is." Mr. Jennings chuckled, reaching into his jacket pocket. "Then let me give you something." He pulled out a small silver pin, a miniature pair of wings, similar to the junior pilot wings Marcus's dad had given him. "These were mine when I started out. They reminded me to keep reaching for the sky, even when things got tough. I think you're ready for them." Marcus's eyes widened in surprise as Mr. Jennings handed him the pin. He felt a surge of pride and gratitude as he held it, realizing the significance of the gesture. "Thank you, sir. I'll take good care of them." Mr. Jennings placed a hand on his shoulder. "You've got the spirit of a true pilot, Marcus. Remember, flying isn't just about the destination. It's about the journey. And from what I've seen today, you're well on your way." As the event wound down, Marcus felt a deep sense of accomplishment. The aviation day had been a success, and he had seen firsthand how his passion for flying could inspire others. Students, parents, and teachers thanked him as they left, some expressing newfound interest in aviation. Later, as they packed up, Captain Hayes joined Marcus, a proud smile on his face. "You did something amazing today, son. You brought people together, and you showed them the beauty of flight." Marcus looked up at his dad, his heart full. "It felt good, Dad. It felt like I was part of something bigger than myself. Captain Hayes nodded. That's exactly it. Flying has a way of connecting people, reminding us of the vastness of the world and the possibilities within it. And you've already started creating that for others. That evening, as Marcus sat on his bed, he looked at the silver pin Mr. Jennings had given him. He placed it beside the junior pilot wings his father had given him, marveling at how much these small tokens represented. They weren't just symbols. They were reminders of the journey he had begun and the people who believed in him. Months turned into years, and Marcus's love for aviation only grew. He excelled in his studies, learning everything he could about aerodynamics, physics, and navigation. His father continued to be his mentor and guide, teaching him not just about flying, but about responsibility, respect, and courage. When Marcus was old enough, he enrolled in a flight school, spending countless hours in small training planes, feeling the thrill of each takeoff and the satisfaction of every smooth landing. His father's lessons echoed in his mind, guiding him through each maneuver and challenge. On the day of his first solo flight, Marcus felt a familiar blend of excitement and nerves. He stood on the tarmac, his hands trembling slightly as he checked the plane, just as Charlie had taught him years before. His father watched from the sidelines, his face filled with pride. Marcus climbed into the cockpit, fastening his seatbelt and going through the pre-flight checklist. When he was ready, he took a deep breath, his mind clear and focused. He gripped the controls, his heart steady as he taxied down the runway. As the plane lifted off, Marcus felt a surge of freedom, a sense of belonging he had known ever since that first flight with his dad. The world stretched out beneath him, vast and open, and he knew that this was where he belonged. He thought of his father, of Charlie, of Mr. Jennings, and of all the people who had inspired him along the way. Each one had left a mark on his journey, guiding him toward his dream. As he soared through the sky, Marcus knew he was not just flying. He was continuing a legacy, carrying forward the values that had been passed down to him. And he knew that someday he would pass those values on to others, sharing the wonder and freedom of flight with a new generation of dreamers. And so, with a heart full of gratitude and a spirit as boundless as the sky, Marcus continued his journey. He was no longer just the son of a pilot. He was a pilot in his own right, ready to face whatever challenges and adventures lay beyond the clouds.